Hello, listeners. I'm Shari Simmons.
And I'm Jann Simmons.
Thank you for joining us today. I had an interesting conversation this week with one of my friends in law enforcement, and I asked him the question, are you seeing the suicide rate go down? Because we know there was a spike in suicides across the nation at the start of the pandemic. And so I thought his answer would be yes, now there's a light at the end of the tunnel and we're seeing a decrease, but that is not at all what he said. He said that the rate is either remaining steady in some states or rising. And that baffled me and concerned me. So I wanted to have our next guest on. And Paula, I may screw up your last name. Paula Fontenelle?
Fontenelle.
Fontanelli. Oh, that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
everybody screws up my last name. Don't feel bad.
Paula Fontanelli, I'm so glad that you joined us on our podcast today. You wrote a book called Understanding Suicide, Living with Loss, Paths to Prevention. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what we're seeing in our world right now. Tell us a little bit about your story because you lost your father to suicide back in 2005.
Yes. Well, thank you first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor because this has become, fighting the stigma surrounding suicide has become a mission in my life after my dad died. And what happened to him, I think it's a very common story when I've been talking to families who lost loved ones to suicide for, I don't know, 13 years now. And so many of the stories are very similar to what happened to my father, because we have all these myths and all these misconceptions about suicide. And I'm hopeful that we're going to touch on some of them today. He died in 2005. Prior to my dad's suicide, I had never been touched by suicide. I didn't know anyone, but of course, there's so much stigma because maybe someone did die that I knew, and it was just covered up because that's what happens. People are so afraid of talking about suicide but I never even heard about someone who had taken their lives. So my dad was really the first one. And now, of course, looking back, I see that he gave all the signs that he was going to do it. But back then, that's what happens. You look at them and you just go day by day. You try to solve one problem here, one problem there. And for example, a few months before he died, he called me and we had lunch, and he was asking me for my documents. So back then, I didn't think anything of it because he was having a lot of financial difficulties at the time, and I was helping him out with that. So I just thought it made sense if we have a joint account. He said, I need to open a joint account with you. I said, okay, makes sense. It will make things easier for me, paying. I was taking care of his finances. It's okay. That's a good idea. But now looking back, that was part of his planning because he wanted to make sure that someone could, do whatever he wanted me to do with the money afterwards. So you look back and you see the signs, but at the time, I knew that he, for example, I had talked to him. I knew that he wasn't doing okay. He was having, as I said, financial difficulties. He had divorced my mom after 30 something years of marriage. A few years before that, it was 3, 4 years maybe. He had a new relationship, which came with a lot of responsibility because the person had 2 kids. And my father was a family man and he felt responsible for those kids. So that was a lot of pressure. Um, so there was a lot of pressure on him, and he had opened a new business and it didn't work out. All his savings, he used all his savings on that. And he just looked to his future and said, do I want to keep living like this? But at the time, he gave all these signs. We didn't see any at all. The only one that I actually saw back then was that I thought he had depression. I've always been into psychology. I've always loved studying the brain and psychology and everything. And I told him, Dad, you need to see a psychiatrist because I think you have you have the symptoms of depression. So he did. He went to see a doctor. But as it happens so many times again with suicide, he never did it. He never followed the treatment. He got the medication, never took them. So that's one of the signs that back then I saw, but you never, Shari and Jen, you never think about something like that. So, no, there has to be a way, right? And it just doesn't cross your mind that someone you love is going to take their lives. And that's why people are so baffled and so much in shock after a suicide, because even when you see the signs, even when you know that, for example, they're struggling with mental illness, which happens quite often, even when that happens, you don't think that they're going to do it. It's hard to believe because it goes against the most basic of human instinct, right? Which is self-preservation.
Right.
So it was really, really hard for all of us, as you can imagine. And the stigma doesn't help, because it's one of the differences with suicide grief is that nobody wants to talk about it. When you die by, let's say, a car accident or cancer, a disease or anything, people want to ask questions. They are always around you and they're asking, oh, what happened? And do you need anything? When it's suicide, the moment you say the word, it was suicide, there is silence. Nobody knows what to say, right? And I understand. I mean, I'm sure I would have done the same back then. And this is what made me, it actually totally changed my life. At the time, I worked as a journalist. I did that for 20 something years. That just says how old I am, I guess. So I did that for 20 something years. And then after my dad died, what happened to me was the way that I deal with pain. And I can give you some more examples in my family because everybody deals differently. But for me, I always have to understand. I have to have answers. I think this is a natural response, human response. We need to understand. We need to make meaning. And what I did was I just started reading compulsively on suicide, which was good on one side because it helped me understand. It really did. Reading about other people who went through the same thing or specialists. I just started buying books on suicide and reading as much as I could. But at the same time, I kept reliving. I relived his death. So that had a very deep impact on me, on my psychological. And I actually developed depression during that time. And I remember that because by the time that happened, I already knew. I mean, I had studied so much about this, and I started seeing in myself the symptoms, right? So I would be with friends in a bar having fun, and this fog would just come on me. And I remember it was hard to breathe, that I wanted to cry for no reason, quote unquote, at all, right? And I started feeling many, many changes, back pain that wouldn't go away. And one day I just said, I need to see a doctor. So I went to see my doctor, my general practitioner, and I told her, I think I have depression, but let's get hormones and all of the other things out of the way. So we did all the testing, and she finally gave me a name for a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed, and I followed the treatment for 1 year, which was what he told me. Stopped taking medication, never needed it again. But it had a profound impact on me and my family. I changed my life. I decided that I wanted to do this to help break the stigma, help prevent suicide. So I went to school again. I did my psychoanalysis training for 5 years, and then a master's degree in mental health. And here I am. I work as a therapist now. So it just shows how much of an impact it has. But it impacted everyone in my family. My sister also developed depression, and she still until today she takes medication. So it's a really, really tough grief to go through.
It is, because you really don't. There's no reason. I mean, if cancer is there, okay,
Yeah, there's
what
an
that
answer.
could there. Yeah, but it's I do have a quick question, and then have a bigger question. But when you were going through your depression,
Mhm.
did you think that suicide
Was
was
an
a way
option?
out for you?
No,
No,
never.
you didn't. Okay,
No. I wanted to get well, for
good
sure.
for you.
For sure. I immediately said, no, I'm not. And it's a great that you asked this, because my sister this is one of the ways that it affected her. She had a daughter. Clara was 5 at the time, I think, when my dad died. Yeah, she was 5 at the time. And I remember one day she called me crying. And I don't know if she had started the treatment yet or not. But to her, my dad's suicide had, in a way, a positive impact, because I remember she told me, I need to be alive for Clara. And she
Oh,
said, I will not do what he did. I will not, I can't
yeah.
do this to her. So for her, it was a positive influence on her. And she went to the doctor, and she's been in treatment since then. But for her, and that's what happens. It can happen both ways. Sometimes a family member, it opens, and that's the thing about suicide with the family. Sometimes it opens the door, it becomes an option, something
I
that was never
know.
there before. So it can go both ways, but it can have the opposite effect. So I will never do this because I've been through the grief. So I would never do that
Right.
to anyone. So it depends. But to me, no, I never had suicidal thoughts. But I did get to a point where I remember that I said to myself, I get it. I get how someone
Right.
gets to that point.
Oh,
That
totally.
helps with I think it helps with empathy, because you understand when someone comes to you and says, I'm thinking about suicide, you immediately connect. You go, yeah, tell me
Yeah.
more,
Let's
right?
talk more.
Right,
Yeah.
Sherry? Tell me more. That's the question
Exactly.
you have to ask. Don't run away from it, because
Yeah.
chances are they're very alone.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, you've written 3 books on suicide, right?
No, one.
Oh, just the one?
I
Oh,
have 3 published books, but only one is on suicide. Yeah.
oh,
The other ones
gotcha.
are totally unrelated. One is a romance. So
Oh, wow. Well,
yeah,
that's
it's
awesome.
fiction. Yeah.
In the book that you did write,
Mhm.
on suicide, what was the main, what is it you need your listeners to get or to learn or to feel
Yeah.
from your book?
Yeah. Wow, there's so many messages there, but I think one of the main ones is that suicide is not about dying. Most of the time, someone who is thinking about suicide, they don't want to die. They want to end unbearable pain. So it's about pain. And that's so important to know, because the moment that you shift to, okay, this is about pain, let's understand where the pain comes from. And that's actually how you can help. It's by asking questions, by maybe helping them find solutions, by broadening their views, because usually they have a very constricted mind. By the time they get there, that's the only option they see in front of them. So slowly, without judgment, you talk to them and say, okay, let's see. I have a mentor, and I'm sure Shari knows him. His name is Edwin Schneidman. He's considered the father of suicidology. I actually had the honor of interviewing him, and it was an amazing interview. And I think it was one of the last interviews he gave, because he died right after that. He was 90 years old. I interviewed him on the week that he was turning 90. But he says something that I never forgot, and I think it's one of the main messages from my book too, is that there are only 2 questions you ask someone who says something like that. I'm thinking about suicide. One is, where does it hurt? And the second one is, how can I help?
Oh,
Isn't that
it's
beautiful? And
beautiful.
so simple, right? Because
Yes.
our reaction, that's a human reaction, is to fear it. You don't know what to say. And the thing with suicide is, and I think the stigma, why the stigma is around, and it's so strong, and it has become much better, I think, especially the media. We see that the media has been doing a much better coverage of suicide, I think. But I think what is related to the stigma is fear. We all fear suicide. We fear that it might happen to someone we love, and you fear most of all that it might happen to you. It's a scary thought to have, isn't it? But it's important to see that it's fear that's underneath the stigma. I think it's the main thing. because you have to step forward and try to open up that door of the fear and be aware. And one of the other thing that I think I talk about in this course that I'm putting together now is regarding this fear itself. I mean, look at yourself. Is that why can't you talk about it? Ask yourself the question. And one of the main questions and the main messages or the reality of suicide is that it is an option. It is. We have to face that. And I think that's one of the main fears we have of suicide, because what is the natural reaction to fear? You distract, you get away from it, you avoid fear. But we can't avoid suicide because it's the same thing with death. It is an option and it always will be. And the moment you realize that, you can look it in the eye and talk about it and maybe be less judgmental, because it is. You don't tell someone who is thinking about suicide, you don't say, don't talk about that. That can't be an option for you, because it is. You starting wrong. That's not the right way to have this conversation. Because the moment you say that, they'll shut up. They will shut down and they will not continue the conversation. So I think these are main messages that I try to convey in my book, is that, let's look it in the eye, let's fight the stigma, let's not be afraid. And it's okay that you are afraid of suicide. Of course you are afraid. Who wants to die? Who wants a loved one to take their lives? No, but by silencing, you're not helping. You're actually giving it space to grow, because
Yes.
suicidal people, they are afraid of talking about it, because they know that the reaction, it can be a reaction of silence, it can be the reaction of judgment, of this is wrong and this is right. And again, when you are in pain, that's not going to help, right? So yeah, I can talk for 5 hours if you let me.
You just go right ahead.
I appreciate the fact that you are an advocate for suicide awareness, and you speak about really providing that safe space to have the dialogue. This year got dark for people.
Oh my God.
So, and people are, and we're still there, we're still in it. And so, what do you suggest that people say to each other to open that door and checking in? I think if 2020 taught us anything, it was to check in with each other. So, can you speak
Yes.
to that a little bit?
Oh my God, this pandemic is such a scary thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And at the center, I think, of the pandemic and all the psychological and the mental health issues that we're seeing. And I mean, I'm a therapist, you are too, Shari, and we are all booked,
Yep.
right? We all have waiting lists.
Yeah.
Is what you just said. It's about connection. It's about the sense of loneliness. And I see this in my clients, I'm sure you see it in yours. The people who are struggling the most are the ones who don't have a strong support system. They don't have that person who, like you just said, checks in with them. So the main thing for me about the pandemic is connect. Try, just make an effort to connect. I have been in a few lives, especially with Brazil. I talk a lot about this. Check in with your elderly. They are the ones that are most affected in a way, because they already were alone. But now, even the weekly visits or the monthly visits that they had, they don't have anymore, and they have difficulties, for example, with technology. So give them a call, the old-fashioned phone. Do that. But I think the main thing is connect, because isolation, our bodies, and Shari knows this, and she talks about this beautifully. Our bodies, the brain identifies isolation and loneliness as danger. It does, because, and you think of our ancestors, what happened to them if they were alone? They would die. They had to live collectively. And we do too. It's in our DNA. It comes from our ancestors. So connection is the most important thing right now. Try not to be alone. And it goes both ways, because I've also heard people complain, nobody calls me and say, how many people have you called?
Mm,
Check in with yourself. Are you doing it yourself?
right,
Because everyone now is trying to survive, right?
right.
This everydayness that we have with COVID. We don't know when it's Tuesday or Friday or Saturday. There's no, we talk about routine, and it's important to have routine because that gives you back a little bit of sense of control. But my goodness, we're having too much of it, aren't we? Nothing
Yes.
bloody changes.
No, exactly. I asked Sherry a question the other day. She was driving home from work, and I said, okay, now when you get home, she is a professor at university, and she has classes that she teaches at night. And I said, oh, you've got to get home for your class. Well, I was talking to her on Wednesday, and that's a Monday thing. She said, no.
We don't know anymore. We
And
lost
that's what I
sense of
told her.
time.
I said, I
We lost
don't
sense of
know.
time. And I
Exactly.
don't know. I don't know if everything's going too fast or too slow. I don't even know that, right?
Exactly. Good
Before
point.
we had different points of reference, and so today was, oh my God, went so fast, and then the next day, oh my God, today the day is dragging on. Now we don't know if it's going fast or if it, because it's just the sameness. But I go back to connection. Prioritize that. Prioritize your
Yeah.
friends, prioritize your family if you get along with them, of course, and also be selective. Who do you bring into your life right now? That's very important. It's not about numbers. It's about the quality of your connection.
Oh, that's beautiful. You know, my other daughter, my youngest daughter, when she was a senior in high school, her boyfriend, um, and those first loves, how important they
Oh my
are.
God, I never forget mine.
Oh, I don't either. And he committed suicide. And uh she did, and I think still does all these years later, deals with guilt about that.
Yeah. Oh.
Um, I want you to kind of speak about that from your own perspective, but also, people, friends, I attempted suicide twice. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and, and I would try to, give the clues. I was just wanting, like you said earlier, I wanted out of the pain. I really didn't want to die, but this was my only way I knew to get away from the pain. But I think my friends knew I was in trouble, but it was like, what if I caused her to do it? What do you say to those people? You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Okay, so I am going to divide that in two parts, what to do and
please.
what to avoid, right? Because these two go together. The first thing, I already talked about the fear, right? So check in with yourself, get ready for that conversation. It's not going to be an easy one. But the first thing I always say is put judgment aside, bury judgment if you can. There is no right or wrong. This is not a conversation of you trying to convince them that they are wrong, that they shouldn't do it. It's not about that. Again, it's about understanding where they are in their pain. What is the source of the pain? So the first thing to say is, tell me more. Something very simple. Wow, I'm validate what they're feeling, because and you tell me, Jen, if that's true. But as someone who is contemplating suicide, they have a lot of fear that they will not be understood, right?
Absolutely.
It's really hard to talk. You, as you said, I'm giving the clues, but I'm not sure if they are. But you are afraid of judgment too.
Oh,
So
yes.
the first thing to do is put aside judgment. Ask them how they're feeling. Ask them to just tell me what's happening in your life. What is taking you to this place? So let them talk. The first thing to do is let them talk exhaustively. Let them talk about their fears, what's happening, because it can be circumstantial. It can be related to mental illness. It can be, but even mental illness, we used to talk about 90%. I'm sure Jen remembers this Shari remembers this number. 90% of suicides are related to mental illness. Not anymore. It's not. This number is dead. The latest numbers we have, for example, for the US, is that 54% of suicide are not related to mental illness anymore. It's personal crisis. So it's something that's happening to that person. So ask the questions. Don't be afraid. Let them talk, because they are so alone in their pain. They're trying to talk to someone, but they're afraid. They're afraid of judgment. They're afraid that they're going to hospitalize them, because that's the thing that comes to mind, right? And that's a
Yes.
scary thing, because we know that hospitalization can re-traumatize. That's like
Yes.
a last resort. But talk to them. Try to amplify connection. Again, we go back to connection. So with consent, and that's very important, especially if you're going to bring in family members, because sometimes that's where the crisis comes from, right? So try to understand where the crisis comes from. Try to open up their perspective, broaden their perspective on what's happening. Bring in hope. That's very important. Try to talk to them, for example, of reasons of living. Bring up some joy. Pay attention to their facial expression, and talk about other things in their lives until you find that little tiny smile when they talk about a child, for example, their kid, or an activity that they love doing. That's a reason for living. Memorize that. That's something that you can talk about, and try to get them out of that space of pain and darkness, and in the constriction that they have, that this is the only way out. So the main thing to do is to listen to them, to see where the pain comes from, and see how you can help. You broaden their perspectives, and try to show them other options that are around. Strengthen their connections, bring in some more support, and of course, clinical support if possible. If they can see, mental health professional, that helps. If you think it's a mental illness, then a doctor for sure. Or here you have a practitioner, right? Nurse practitioner. We don't have that in Brazil. It has to be a psychiatrist in Brazil. But here, yeah, take them to a doctor. But here's the thing: don't ask them to go. Be proactive. Take them to the doctor. I did that to a friend of mine. I actually had, and thankfully I knew I had already published my book, but I had one day a phone call from a friend that I immediately identified that she was calling to say goodbye, because that's one of the signs of suicide, right? Immediately. So I let her talk. She was talking about the past, because that's what they do. They start, remembering good times. They become very nostalgic. That's one of the warning signs. And when she finished, I did what we're supposed to do. Don't be afraid to use the word. Ask directly. I said, "Are you thinking about suicide?" And she just started crying and crying and crying. And I said, "Listen, cry as much as you want. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to listen to you." So I started asking her all the questions that I knew could help. And at the end, the other thing that I usually say is try to verbally talk to them and just ask for some time. We used to do something in the past too, Shari, you remember this. We used to do contracts, and it was actually a paper that they signed. We know that now that doesn't help anymore, because they do that just to make you feel better. It doesn't really mean a thing to them. And sometimes it can give them a kind of a bad feeling about this, because especially if you are a therapist, they may think that, well, you're trying to cover yourself, not me. It's not about me here. So don't do the contract thing, but you can ask for time. Listen, do you think you can hold on to that idea for a while? And that's what I did. I said, can you give me 1 month? That's all I ask. It's your life, but give me a month. Let's try something together. And I took her to the doctor. She's still alive. This was like 10 years ago. So that's what you do. You hold their hands. Don't leave them alone, because they already are very, very alone. So connection, don't judge, don't say right and wrong, forget the shoulds and shouldn't do this, or guilt. You talked about guilt, right? You started talking about that. Don't guilt trip them. Don't talk about their kids, that they're going to suffer if they do that. They know. They know, and that's probably why they're still alive. But if you shame them, they're just going to shut down. So forget shaming, forget guilt tripping them, forget rights and wrong and shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. You are there to help. So give them their hands, hold their hands, and help them through it together. Don't leave them alone.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You've mentioned a couple of warning signs, and I want to cover a few more. You know, you mentioned somebody calling and, getting real nostalgic and,
Mm.
sort of assuming this language of goodbye. Your own father, started having you take over finances, and that was a warning sign. What are some of the other ones?
You know, Sherry, my dad, now looking back, he was textbook warning signs. He gave them all of them. You just go tick, tick, tick. I'll give you some. Well, first of all, you have the verbal warning signs and non-verbal. So the verbal warning signs is when they start talking about death. They start saying things like, "It doesn't mean a I don't see the point of living." They won't say, "I want to die," or they might not say that, or they might, but they might not even be so straightforward. But they'll say things like, "I don't see the point of living. I wish I never woke up. I wish tomorrow I didn't wake up." So that's like a passive thought of suicide. But pay attention to what they say in the verbal signs, because they might say it differently, teenagers especially. But the non-verbal ones, think first of depression. When we read about symptoms of depression, many of them can be a symptom of a warning sign for suicide. So extreme isolation, withdrawal from friends, when they stop doing the things that they used to love doing. So they stop those activities, they kind of lose passion for things. They start not taking care of their appearance anymore. So they stop showering. And, women, we don't go to hairdressers anymore. We don't paint our nails. So that's another warning sign too. Sadness, anger, mood swings. Mood swings is a strong one. Those are signs that if you read depression symptoms, can be related to depression. So that might be a mental illness and related to that. But there are some warning signs that are like red flags. And why are they red flags? Because we know that it's past thoughts and it's past ideation. When you think about suicide, think of a continuum. So the beginning is the thoughts. Thoughts of suicide, many people have those. It's quite common, actually, passive or active or whatever, but it can cross your mind. But these are thoughts. And then you progress into ideation. This is something that's always there. It's an open door that you never close, right? So, and some people live with suicide ideation all their lives. So it's ideation, and then comes intent. After, so do they want to die? Are they really thinking about an attempt? Then they progress to planning, attempt, and completion. So it's a continuum. Suicide is a continuum. And when I say pay attention to the red flags, it means that they have stepped at least up to intention and planning. They are really thinking about suicide. So some of them, and I'll give you the example of my father, because as I said before, he just ticked all of them. Saying goodbye, he did that. He called many friends, and I only found out, of course, when I was writing the book, because I interviewed many people. But he did say goodbye to my sister. I was here in the US on vacation when he died. I was coming back that week. But he went to my sister's house the day before, and he wouldn't leave. He just stayed and stayed like all afternoon until night. And my sister, she said that she sensed that there was something wrong. Sometimes he would start choking when he was talking. He said, well, what is going on? There's something, and he wouldn't leave. So he went there to say goodbye, clearly. So he gave that sign. And she actually called me the night when he left. She called me, she was crying. And she said, Paula, I think he's thinking, I don't know what the word, but she didn't use the word suicide. But I think she said something like, I think he's going to do something stupid, or he's thinking of, there's something wrong with Dad. And I said, don't worry about it, because I'm coming back this week. I'll sit down and talk to him. But I didn't have time because he killed himself the next day in the morning. I woke up with another phone call. So that sign he gave. The other sign he gave was being nostalgic. So Renata, my sister, she told me that she actually asked him. He always picked me up at the airport. For some reason, my dad loved to do that. We never understood, but he always picked us up at the airport. And she would ask him, Dad, are you picking her up? Paula's coming back on Thursday. Are you picking her up? And he would change the subject. He would go back to the past and he would say, oh, I remember the trip I did with Paula to blah, blah, blah. And he would start talking about the past. So that's what they do because they know there is no future. If you talk about the future and plans, they'll go back to the past. They'll become very nostalgic because they want to die remembering good times. So they will call friends and talk about parties that they went to. So saying goodbye is a warning sign, a red flag one. Being nostalgic and only talking about the past is another one. Getting your affairs in order, financial situation, debts, all of that. You sell your house, you just get all these things out of the way because you know it will be complicated for your family to do that. But it just shows how much into planning they are. My dad did that too. I told you in the beginning the story about opening the account with me. That was part of the planning. Now I see that very clearly. So he paid, he made sure he didn't have any debts, and all the money he had left, which wasn't much, he put it in the bank account that I could take care of because it was the joint account. So that's how far. I mean, he planned for months. We know now. So that's another one, getting affairs in order. And the other one, the last one that I mentioned, no, two more that I remember now. One is giving away possessions, even the ones that have some kind of memory attached or sentimental value. They start giving away everything because they know they don't need anything anymore. So that's another. If you see someone that loves their guitar, giving their guitar away, I mean, stop and talk to them because that's another one. And the last one just escaped my mind. Can't remember. Just went away. It will come back. If it comes back. But these are warning signs that really, really need attention because it shows that they are planning. They already know where, when, and how.
Wow.
I've also seen clients in the past have a shift in mood that's pretty drastic.
Oh, yes, that's
Where
it.
they actually look happy. I mean, they're giving away their things and they're happy.
And that's the trickiest one.
It is tricky. But sometimes that signals I have a plan. I know what I'm going to do and I feel at peace with it.
Yes. I'm so glad you reminded me. That's the last one that I always talk about. And we hear this, I don't understand. They were doing much better. She was doing much better. She had improved. But it's actually not, it's not improvement. It's just the peace of mind. Before they had a conflict. Now they don't have the conflict anymore. They have made a decision and that's why they're at peace. So, and that's a tricky one because how on earth can you know, right? But that's why it's so important that we talk about this because it's someone who is listening now, they may go, wow, that's what's happening. Maybe I should stop and talk to them and check in.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned those, and I can hear the minds of our listeners right now saying, "Well, what do I do with that? If they're happy, what do I even ask about?" And I think what I would caution people or challenge people to do is an emotional check-in with everyone in your life. Hey, emotional check-in. Where are you at? We're still in this pandemic. Tell me where you're at. I have a friend that will drill down with me when I give her the pat answer. When I say to her, oh, I'm fine, she'll say, that's not good enough for me. I want to understand what fine means. And I so appreciate that. Having someone in my life that can really sort of push me to go deeper and not settle for the fine answer.
Yeah. Or not so, one that I hear all the time, not too bad. what does that even mean? Is that a good thing or a bad thing, right?
Right, right.
We don't have that answer in Portuguese. So for me, it's like, that doesn't mean a thing to me. Can we just elaborate a little more? But it's like, you can ask very simple questions, right, Shari? I usually ask, what are the challenges for you? What is the hardest thing for you with this pandemic? Because we just assume we know. Oh, maybe it's because they don't talk to people. No, sometimes it's because I can't walk my dog anymore, or simple things. I can't go have a conversation with this person that I used to see every day, and we used to talk every day because that's where I used to get my coffee. It's different things for different people. It's because I can't do my Zumba class. I know that's hard for me. And I used to love doing my Zumba class. Can't do that not with people, and it's not the same in front of a TV. I do it. It's not the same. But just talk. Just ask, what are the challenges? But now what I do too, Shari, and I think because the pandemic, of course, is a tragedy. It's a human tragedy, and I don't want to minimize that. But I think it has had some silver linings too. We deaccelerated. We now know we don't need that much of a rushed life and crazy doing 100 things. A lot of people are here now saying, my life is simple now. I don't know if I'm going back to that life. So it made us reflect on the life we had too. So I ask things, so what has it changed for the best? What has improved in your life with all this thinking that we're doing now, and in reflecting, and as I said before, the friendships changed, I think, for most of us, right? We're more selective. We lost, I mean, who hasn't lost a friend during the pandemic? I did, because some people just disappeared from your life. And I tried, I kept checking in, and at some point you just go, you know what, do I want this person in my life? I don't think so. Right. So but check in like that, ask the challenges, what would make it better for you, what helps. We now know what helps. In the beginning, the first few months, we didn't know. We were kind of walking around lost. We didn't know. Now we do. And what helps you when you're in a dark place? Or motivation, that's the thing that we hear every day. I have no motivation to do anything. Yeah, so what gets you out of there?
Exactly.
So ask questions, just investigate, right?
Right. If we came at our relationships from an inquisitive lens and really
Curiosity, be
with
curious.
curiosity, I just wonder how much, how richer they would be,
Mm-hmm.
We more
Yeah.
people.
I did this with all my clients at the end, in December, the last session with all of them. I just did a recap of the year. Okay, let's talk about this year. It's been tough. Yeah, it's been horrible. Yeah. But what are the good things that happened in your life too during this pandemic? New people that you found. I had someone, a friend of mine, say, I had friends that I hadn't seen and talked for decades. And now we have this Zoom meeting every 2 weeks or so, and I have new friendships in my life. So it wasn't all bad. So let's look at the good things too.
Well said.
Totally agree.
Tell our listeners how they get your book, how they find out about your podcast, your YouTube channel. You're
Yeah.
wonderful. I'd like them to hear more from you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. Well, my podcast is called Understand Suicide. So if you type that on wherever you listen to your podcast, Understand Suicide. And also through my website is the same, understandsuicide.com. So there you have a lot of resources. I talk about books that are good to read. I talk about grief. I talk about risk factors, warning signs. They're all there. And you have a lot of resources for teachers, for parents. And I talk a lot about grief and what to say, what to avoid. So if you want more resources, go to my website and all the videos, because my podcast, I have the videos too. So you can watch, because some people, I think it's very, very nice to watch. I like to watch podcasts if I can, because I want to see that person talk, right? So that's why I started recording mine too. So if you go to YouTube and you type Understand Suicide, you're going to find all the videos of the podcasts too. And the book is on Amazon. So just type my name and you find it.
Paula Fontenelle, you have been a fantastic guest. I appreciate you
you.
going there on a topic that's still very difficult for people to discuss.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I appreciate you for having the courage to open this door. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Oh, I want to thank you too. Your voice and your kindness are just a balm. They're just a balm.
Thank
I just
you.
I just adore you so much.
And I
Thank you.
adore your accent, Jen. I
Thank
love that
you.
accent. It just takes me back to my Dallas friends that I love so much.
Uh, thank you so much. Um,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. I want to give a shout out to Mental Health News Radio Network. And you can find us at thetraumaspeakers.com, where you can check out our books, check out events. And until next time, remember, which way is a choice you get to decide.